Last week, the news about the remains of Lieutenant Joseph Finneran of Needham coming home after 76 years drew considerable local and statewide attention. For years, Finneran's next of kin, his nephew Bill Glennon, had been actively engaged in the process of identifying his uncle. Municipal producer Yuxia Win has the story, which tells a decades-long journey of searching and patience.
This is Joe's actual officer uniform and hat. The night before the raid, after their final briefing, the commander said, "Now go back to your bunks and write your last letter home and put everything that you want returned to your family should you not return."
As a child, Bill Glennon learned about his Uncle Joe through his mother's hope chest. All the medals, newspaper articles, and letters wove together his last moments of life. But Glennon wanted to know more.
I asked my mother about Joe. He was the most easygoing guy. She said he was her favorite brother. He was a really good golfer. We were caddies at Needham Country Club. And I could tell right away she didn't really like talking about it too much. The pain was still there, even though it was like 20 years later.
For decades, Glennon and his family knew his uncle was missing during Operation Tidal Wave, a low-altitude bombing raid that managed to destroy German oil fields in Romania. 11 years ago, an encounter with an amateur military historian changed Glennon's perspective, who later on sent him a lot of information about the crash of his uncle's plane, Old Body.
He wasn't really missing in action. He was just unidentified. When the plane crashed, there were monks in an abbey that were right down the road, and they gave them all a Christian burial. And after the war, the American Graves Registration Department came through disinterred remains based upon local records. And they tried to make identifications of the crew from dental records. That's all they could do then. And they identified 4, and unfortunately Joe was not one of them.
Glennon and other family members provided DNA to Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, which tries to contact family members of unidentified casualties.
Because family members were getting old, it wasn't just the World War II generation, but so they were trying to build up a database of DNA.
They waited for almost another decade before they faced the first possible identification.
I got a phone call, and I thought, well, this is it. And it wasn't. It was another soldier. I remember thinking that, well, at least someone got some good news. Maybe someday we'll get some good news.
Praise and glorify your
2 years later, in August 2019, the good news arrived.
Phone rang. I just thought she was updating her files on next of kin and things like that. And she said, in a very calm voice, she said, "Well, I just want to let you know I've identified your uncle's remains." Then waiting to hear that for 60 years.
Glennon, his sister, and cousins chose to lay their uncle to rest on Veterans Day weekend. His remains arrived at Logan Airport on November 1st, followed by a motorcade down to the Doherty Funeral Home in Needham, where his family would host a wake 1 week later.
I thought Veterans Day was perfect. It would draw attention to all the missing people from prior wars, not just World War II, Korea, Vietnam.
Waves of visitors came to pay respect to the first lieutenant at the wake. Among them were families who are still waiting for identifications of their loved ones.
There was one fellow who, when he heard the story, he actually went over. He did his own investigation and went to the crash site in Germany. He showed me a piece of the airplane, of his uncle's airplane. He's still waiting.
Last Saturday, November 9th, the burial mass for Finneran was performed at St. Joseph Church in Needham, the same church where he was baptized. Later that day, he was buried at Mount Benedict Cemetery in West Roxbury, where he henceforth can rest in peace alongside his mother and brothers.
We had this wonderful opportunity to tell his story and bring him home and give him the send-off that he never really had. There are About 80,000 people still missing from World War II, and I would say to the people that are in the middle of an investigation, as a matter of fact, I talked to one, he's 81 years old, and he's about 4 years into it. I said, well, you just hang in there because they're doing everything they can, and 4 years compared to 11, maybe in a couple of years you'll have some good news.